All right, the board meeting is in session. And we got some newbies on the show today. First, let's start off with the old veteran, right-hander from St. Charles County, former Chief of Staff of Governor Holden, and local gadfly, Jane Duker. Jane, good morning this morning.
Good morning. I actually come from Chesterfield. We haven't defected yet to St. Charles, but that was, yeah.
Also joining us from the Show Me Institute, we have kicked David Stokes out. He's on the bench. He's in the penalty box. Joe Miller, policy researcher. Welcome to Big 550 KTRS, Joe.
Good morning.
And from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, from the editorial board, ladies and gentlemen, back by popular demand, Deb Peterson. Good morning, Deb Peterson.
There you go. She is bringing it today.
Oh, boy.
You're in
That
big
drive
trouble.
up to 270 and took it out of me.
I never
morning.
thought I would say this, but I sure do miss Tony Messenger.
Oh,
Snap.
that is just
In a
plain
private
hurtful.
moment, McGraw told me recently that he missed me.
Oh,
Just
see?
so
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, there you go.
I know he gets out in public and he wants to act like no big deal, but there we have it.
There we go. In the editorial page, Deb Peterson of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, there is a editorial saying that they should use the funds from the Children's Fund to help the children of Normandy. I'm wondering if anybody called you a racist or put a hit out on you for writing that.
I did get called a racist the other day by a caller from St. Charles County. I did not yet listen to my voicemail, so who knows what's happened this morning. But, yeah,
Right.
it's a pretty routine activity.
All right, let's get to it. We'll start with you, Jane Duker. I think the story of the week is this Steve Stenger, Mike Jones, Charlie Dooley death match, if you will.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts as you sit and watch this, and how contentious is this race going to get over the next month?
Well, I happened to be at the meeting, and so it was. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It was the most unprofessional display I've ever seen in government, and the idea that a staffer, can go and and disrespect an elected. I mean, it's just so beneath the whole process. And the biggest problem I had with it, that's fine. You want to, get all tough and whatnot. My biggest problem with it was the whole tirade had nothing to do with the kids. It had nothing to do with Charlie Dooley. It had all to do with Mike Jones. And that's what was really disconcerting. So there was no discussion about policy, about whether there can be children's services money going to these kids or whether the kids get to go back to the schools they transferred to, which are really weighty issues to these people. I mean, these families are in a nightmare. And, and this is what they got. And so that was really disconcerting. Frankly, he should be fired. I mean.
Can I jump in?
Yes, you can. You don't have to raise your hand.
While,
you can just jump in.
please, while I'm not here to defend Charlie or Mike Jones, I do think that there was some truth in the accusation that Steve has not been a big defender of African-American children. However, he lives in a district, he represents a district, Afton, that is not largely African-American. So it's sort of a false charge in the first place. And yet, he will, if he wants to be county executive, he is going to be county executive for the entire county. Therefore, he's going to have to do, I think, quite a bit to show his support for this part of the community. And perhaps this is a first step for him.
Hold on a second here. How can we're now going to have to figure out how many black kids we help versus white kids we help. If there's a child in need and you do something to help children in need,
good for you.
Chances are one or two of them might be African-American and or a minority.
However, the transfer issue affects largely minority children, African-American
And here's a guy
kids.
who wants to take this children's fund and use it for these minority kids in Normandy.
As I'm supporting.
So by definition, to say that Steve Stenger really doesn't help African-American kids, I don't really get that. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Politics is
well,
what it's all about, unfortunately.
But if you're going to, if you want people to help you and you want people to do good things, you don't punish them when they come up with a solution. Out of all the state board members and the state, Steve Stenger is the only one that came up with something specific and a specific call to help these kids. And that just goes not just to the Children's Services Fund in St. Louis County, but it goes to the State Board of Education, of which Mike Jones is a member. And he's vested in his own decision, which is problematic because he works for the county. He's supposed to represent the county kids, but he's also on the state board. So which decision and which interest are you defending? And that's a problem.
I also think it really speaks to the bigger issue, which is this entire race is becoming about race.
Well, hold on a second. I want to go back to what you said. You said Steve Stenger hasn't helped out black kids. How do you know that? How can you say that?
Look at his policies. He does not have any policy moves that have been aimed at helping solve this transfer issue?
Well, first of all, the issue came up because the state board decided these kids couldn't go back to their schools. That's the problem. I mean, and that happened last week.
Well, there was a prior issue to that. It was that they're in a failing school district.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, this is not just something that happened overnight.
This is a state issue that needs to be resolved at the state level, and the county has limited ability to deal with that issue. So the best he can do, which I agree with, is stand up and say this decision is wrong for these kids, and we may have some resources out there that can help them. And the idea that we're sitting on $80 million when we've got kids hurting is an abomination.
And I agree with that totally. I think it was clever. It was a smart way to look at using this money. That has been an issue for about a year and a half now.
Absolutely.
We don't need those reserves in that fund.
Joe Miller, you want to chime in on this? You want to get between these two ladies?
Yeah, the poor guy.
Well, I just got to say, I mean, like, to me, this political process is something that I don't, as a resident of the city, I don't really know very much about about the fight that's going on there. But I would say that, from what I can see, we've gotten away from the policy. We've gotten maybe a little bit too much in the politics, and I think that the focus really should be on the children and what's going to best benefit them.
Right, and there's no question ringing that bell, ringing that code word has all sorts of connotations to it. But Charlie Dooley has to answer the question. You have this children's fund that has $80 million sitting in it. What about you helping African-American kids? You have this fund that is designated to help children in need. I'm sure many of them are African-Americans, and this $80 million fund is sitting there. Charlie Dooley, what have you done to help African-American kids?
You know what, Charlie? He has also tried to use some of that money to help some cronies, and I did try to allude to cronyism in the piece I wrote in today's paper, because that is not the proper way to use those funds. And I think that I like a much better suggestion, which is, these funds are to be used for kids who are having mental health problems and their families. I think it would be great to use it for the Normandy kids.
Because of course they're suffering that.
They're suffering.
And
they've been traumatized.
And this is the thing. So we've got till June 30th. Mm-hmm. And, they're supposed to, the schools are supposed to tell the state board. And this is the other problem I have with the state board's decision. So here we go. They started the transfer program. They knew when they unaccredited Normandy what was going to happen. And these kids and these families went through a horrible process in doing this transfer. You started this. You need to finish it.
Okay.
And that's and what I think they're doing, McGraw, is they are sloughing off their duty on the receiving districts. So if you're Francis Howell, and I did not like the behavior of some of the people in Francis Howell when this started, but you know what? These kids went there, and a lot of them want to go back. So that tells you that they must have been okay with the experience. However, when the state board basically says we're going to abandon transfers, okay, that's basically what they're saying. And so what's Francis Howell supposed to do? They're supposed to say, oh, we're going to jump into this program. The state's not behind it for an undetermined amount of years. We have no idea. Why would we jump into this when the state is abandoning it? But they knew darn well that this was going to be problematic, and they sprinkled unicorn dust and said, oh, yeah, all these districts are just going to jump on board because they have no idea what you're going to do from day to day because you keep whipsawing everybody in your path. But let's shame them and call them heartless if they're the ones making the decision when the state board refuses to say what they're doing.
But the state board, DESE, is passing it off to the legislature, which did fail to act. And so then the state board's hands were tied, and they really didn't have that many opportunities.
But
what is these kids back to
what
their
is
schools.
Criminal about all this? And this is a classic example of people's eyes are rolling in the back of their head because it's too convoluted and what's really going on. The bottom line is this, is that they passed a law that said if you are in a school that is unaccredited, you are allowed as a parent and a student to leave. Mm-hmm. They fought that law for years, and every time they fought it, the courts came back and said, the law says they're allowed to leave, you're allowed to leave. So finally last year, there were out-of-court challenges. The kids left. Mm-hmm. A year later,
they whipsaw them.
No other law has been written. No other law has been rewritten. No law has been
passed,
repealed or passed or nothing. And now the kids, by just a few people on some state board, arbitrarily decide we're going to fake accreditation to this school board and you can no longer transfer. You talk about
mean.
these regulators and the conservatives who complain about these regulators writing their own laws and making their own rules, this is example 1A of how despicable the whole thing is. Governor Nixon and his administration should be ashamed of themselves. They passed a law. This is what the law says. And now no other laws change, but yet they can't do the same thing they did last year.
Well, and this is the problem I have, too. I mean, I don't believe that transfers are a good long-term solution. I don't. I think we need to, and they're right in saying we have to make sure that Normandy remains an anchor in this community. We do not dismantle communities. We don't do it in urban areas. We don't do it in rural areas. I get that. And I believe that you don't take the money out of Normandy at this point. And I understand if you want this district to survive, you cannot drain it. But you started this transfer program. So you pay for these kids and you grandfather the kids. And now if you want to say from going forward, we're not going to do transfers, go get your legislation, go do what you're going to do. But the $2 million, and by the way, there's $2 million sitting in the budget for unaccredited districts, which no longer exist because of the fake designation. Use that money to pay for the kids. I'd rather it go for reading, but unfortunately, we're in a really bad spot.
All right.
Well, and part of the
Send them
problem
back.
is that we don't take it seriously that it is all of our jobs to educate all children.
That's right. It's
It
our
isn't
responsibility.
just that district's job. It is all of our jobs.
the state.
And why it's the state.
I
And
will say that I disagree with you is that this children's fund money should not go to the Normandy School District. People voted on that to help charities. And Normandy's
No, they
that's
didn't.
totally
No,
wrong. They
you're wrong.
voted on it. We approved
kids.
for kids. It's totally
It's
for
for
kids,
kids.
for mental
Totally
health
open for
care.
kids.
Absolutely.
Totally. That's what
Mental
you
health
gotta.
and-
Yes.
yes.
but you're
So-
taking money away from charities.
No, not necessarily. They're
not at all.
providers.
That's why there's $80 million because they
Right.
don't have
They're not
enough
giving it
places
out.
to give it to. They need
Right.
to give it out.
It's
should
not
give it to
just for
nurses for
charities,
newborns.
and it doesn't have to go.
It is not about
Nurses-
It's for kids having mental health problems because it was the fund came about when the state stopped being able to pass
Fund.
through federal
Right.
funding for mental health care for kids.
That's Deb Peterson. She sits on the editorial board of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Jane Duker, former chief of staff to Governor Holden, and Joe Miller's in there somewhere. Joe,
Trying.
Joe, I tell you what, it's hard to get a word in edgewise with these two ladies, but we'll try and get you more time next segment. 9:22 here, Big 550.